Let me tell you something about the person who cannot pick just one thing. The person who is deeply into photography for 6 months and then pivots to learning a language and then is suddenly obsessed with neuroscience and then starts a podcast and then discovers woodworking and then circles back to the photography, but now with a completely different approach because everything they learned in between changed how they see it. The person who has been told their whole life by teachers, by career advisors, by well-meaning people who genuinely cannot understand what they are watching, that they need to focus, that they are scattered, that they are starting things and not finishing them, that they will never be truly excellent at anything because excellence requires the kind of singular devotion that they seem constitutionally incapable of. That person is not broken. They are not undisciplined. They are not failing to apply themselves. They have a specific psychological and neurological profile that the research has been mapping for decades. One that the culture consistently pathologizes because it does not produce the kind of linear, specialized, publicly legible achievement that the systems around us know how to reward. And what that research finds, when you look at it, honestly, is not a developmental deficit. It is one of the most undervalued cognitive profiles in the human population. Let's start with what the research actually calls this, because naming it correctly is the beginning of understanding it. The psychologist and career counselor Barbara Sher was among the first to systematically examine this profile, calling the people who carry it scanners, not because they lack depth, because their minds are built to scan across domains, to pick up what is meaningful and move on when the essential learning has been extracted, rather than staying in a single domain indefinitely. But the more rigorous research framework comes from the work on what cognitive scientists call breadth-biased cognition, the tendency of certain minds to process information preferentially across domains rather than within them, to find the connections between things rather than the depths of single things, to be pulled toward novelty and synthesis and the excitement of the new frontier rather than the refinement and mastery of already familiar territory. This is not the same as a short attention span. The research on multi-potentialites, a term popularized by Emily Wapnick, whose TED Talk on this topic became one of the most watched in the platform's history, distinguishes explicitly between the inability to sustain attention and the deliberate movement of attention toward new domains once the essential engagement with a previous domain has been satisfied. The person who cannot stick to one passion is not someone whose attention gives out. They are someone whose curiosity runs ahead of their environment's capacity to satisfy it. Here is the neurological finding that reframes the entire experience. The research on what is called the novelty-seeking trait, connected to the dopaminergic system and specifically to the DRD4 gene variant associated with dopamine receptor sensitivity, identifies a specific neurological basis for the drive toward new experience, new domains, and new challenges that characterizes the multi-potentialite profile. See, Robert Cloninger's foundational research on temperament and novelty-seeking found that individuals with higher novelty-seeking scores measured across multiple dimensions, including exploratory excitability, impulsiveness, extravagance, and disorderliness, are not simply bored more easily than others. Their dopamine system is responding differently to novelty and to the absence of it. The dopamine system, as we have discussed in previous scripts, is the brain's reward and motivation architecture. And for the high novelty seeker, the dopamine response to genuine novelty, to a new domain, a new skill, a new problem that has not yet been encountered, is significantly more activating than the dopamine response to the continued refinement of already familiar territory. This is not a choice. It is a neurological reality. The brain that lights up most powerfully in the presence of genuine novelty is a brain that is, by design, going to find the return to familiar territory comparatively flat. Not because the familiar territory is without value, because the neurological reward that the system is calibrated to generate is not produced in the same way by the 15th year of a single specialism as by the first month of a genuinely new domain. Here is the piece that the culture most consistently misunderstands about this profile. The movement between passions is not abandonment. It is a different relationship with completion. The person who has never had a multi-passionate friend or colleague or partner genuinely cannot understand this. Because in the standard achievement framework, completion means mastery. It means staying with something until you have reached the highest level of proficiency that the domain rewards. Until you have the credential, the title, the externally legible marker of having done the thing properly. The multi-potentialite's relationship with completion is different, and the research on intrinsic motivation, Deesh and Ryan's self-determination theory, and the broader literature on autonomous motivation provides the framework for understanding why. The multi-passionate person is primarily intrinsically motivated. They engage with a domain because of the genuine pull of curiosity, of challenge, of the specific pleasure of learning that is activated at the frontier of new understanding. That motivation is most intense at the beginning of engagement with a new domain, when everything is unknown, when every day produces genuine insight, when the distance between knowing nothing and knowing something is traversed rapidly and produces the specific neurological reward that the novelty-seeking system is calibrated to generate. As mastery develops, as the domain becomes more familiar, as the frontier of genuine novelty recedes, the intrinsic motivation that was driving the engagement begins to reduce. Not because interest has disappeared, because the specific quality of engagement that the motivation was responding to has changed. The movement to a new domain is not giving up on the old one. It is the intrinsic motivation system responding correctly to a genuine reduction in the novelty density of the engagement. The learning curve has flattened, the frontier has receded, and somewhere else, a new frontier is beckoning. Let me talk about what the multi-passionate person actually builds across their seemingly scattered trajectory, because this is the piece that the culture most consistently fails to see. Research by cognitive scientists on what is called transfer learning, the application of knowledge and skills developed in one domain to problems in a different domain, finds that the ability to transfer is not uniformly distributed. It depends on the breadth of the knowledge base from which the transfer is being made. The specialist who has spent 20 years in a single domain has extraordinary depth in that domain. They have a richness of domain-specific knowledge and skill that the generalist cannot match. What the specialist often lacks, and what the multi-passionate person who has moved across many domains builds in abundance, is the breadth of reference that makes transfer possible. The ability to look at a problem in domain X and recognize that it is structurally identical to a problem they encountered in domain Y, and that the solution developed there applies here with modification. This is what the researcher Ozan Varol calls expert beginner advantage. The person who arrives at a new domain with genuine expertise from a different one, who is a beginner in the specific domain, but an Arvshoint expert in the cognitive tools of learning and synthesis, is often more creative and more rapidly innovative than someone who has been inside the domain for years and whose thinking is constrained by the assumptions of long familiarity. The multi-passionate person is building this capacity continuously. Every domain they engage with seriously adds to a breadth of reference that their specialist peers are not accumulating. And every time they move to a new domain, they bring that accumulated breadth with them. Here is the finding that I think matters most for the multi-passionate person listening to this. The research on what David Epstein, in his landmark book Range, calls the sampling period identifies something counterintuitive about the relationship between breadth of early exploration and eventual excellence. Epstein's analysis of achievement across multiple domains, from sport to science to music to business, found a consistent pattern that directly challenges the early specialization narrative in domains characterized by complexity, ambiguity, and the need for genuine creativity, as distinct from domains where success depends on pattern repetition in stable environments. The individuals who achieved the most significant contributions were disproportionately those who had sampled broadly before settling into depth. They had explored multiple domains, developed multiple competencies, built the broad base of reference that the research on creativity and innovation identifies as the foundation of genuinely novel thinking. And when they did eventually commit to a direction, whether by choice or by circumstance, they brought a richness of perspective to it that the early specialists could not. The winding path is not inefficiency. For the specific kind of achievement that requires genuine creativity and cross-domain synthesis, the The research suggests it is the most effective path available, not despite the apparent scatter. Because of it, here is the relational dimension. Because the multi-passionate person's experience is not just about work and achievement. It shapes how they move through every domain of their life, including the people in it. The person who cannot stick to one passion brings the same orientation to relationships, to communities, to every form of engagement that they bring to their interests. They are intensely present when they are present. They bring a quality of genuine curiosity and full engagement to the people they connect with that people consistently experience as remarkable. And they can be difficult to keep up with. Not because they are superficial. Their engagement is often deeper in its quality than people who engage less intensely, but because the pace of their movement can feel disorienting to people who are not wired the same way, who interpret the shift to a new interest as evidence that the previous interest, and by extension, the previous connection, was not valued. The research on relationship satisfaction and cognitive style compatibility, and the broader literature on how differences in novelty-seeking temperament play out in close relationships, finds that the most important variable is not whether the multi-passionate person's partner shares their orientation. It is whether the partner understands it, whether they have the framework to interpret the movement as what it is, genuine curiosity moving forward, rather than what it is not, withdrawal of care or investment. Understanding is not agreement. The partner who does not share the multi-passionate orientation does not need to become a scanner to build a genuinely satisfying relationship with one. They need the framework that makes the movement legible, that allows them to see the intensity of presence as real even when it is not indefinitely sustained in the same direction. Here is where I want to land, and I want to be direct about what the research actually supports. The multi-passionate person is not going to become a specialist by working harder on their focus. The novelty-seeking neurological profile is not a mindset that deliberate practice can override. The intrinsic motivation that drives toward new frontiers is not a character flaw that discipline can correct. And trying to force that correction, trying to make the multi-passionate person into the specialist that the culture knows how to reward, produces a specific and documented outcome. The reduction of the very qualities that make the profile valuable, the flattening of the curiosity, the dimming of the enthusiasm, the conversion of a naturally generative intelligence into a performance of the specialized focus that it was never designed to sustain. What the research supports instead is the development of structures that allow the multi-passionate profile to function as what it actually is, not forcing depth where the profile requires breadth. Not demanding singular focus where the profile generates value through synthesis. Not measuring completion by mastery where the profile's relationship with completion is driven by genuine intrinsic satisfaction rather than external credential. The multi-passionate person who builds a life, a career, a creative practice, a relational world that is structured around their actual cognitive profile rather than around the specialist norm that was never built for them is not settling. They are doing something that the research consistently finds produces more genuine contribution, more sustained creative output, and more authentic well-being than the alternative. You cannot stick to one passion. The research says you were never supposed to.